Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Navigating Tough Conversations in the Workplace Strategies for Effective Communication webinar. This webinar is part of our new Paradigm Leadership Educational Series, and today is the last webinar of 2024. We will be sharing a link with you at the end of our session today to encourage you to take a look at all of our offerings for 2025, and we hope to see you joining us for this ongoing leadership education series next year. If you will advance the slides, thank you. Our leadership development courses are designed to optimize competencies in human behavior, communication skills, conflict resolution skills, and skills and competencies to support you in your ongoing journey of DEI and B. All of this is designed to support leaders in creating highly engaged workplaces where basic human needs and dignity needs are consistently honored. Here at Workplace Peace Institute and the Workplace Peace Institute Leadership Academy, we are singularly focused on supporting leaders in creating workplace cultures where all people thrive. We really believe that when people thrive, organizations thrive. Next slide. So I'm so excited to introduce our guest speaker today, Dr. Betty Iglesias Snyder. If you have been a part of our ongoing series, you may have had the opportunity to learn from Dr. Snyder. She's one of our lead instructors at the Workplace Leadership Academy. She is a psychologist by training with emphasis and expertise in trauma-informed approaches to healing and leadership, as well as culturally competent approaches to healing and leadership. She's a mediator and peace builder by training, leadership development trainer and coach, and a DEIB strategist and consultant. I'm really excited about today's topic, navigating tough conversations. I know all of us in our workplaces and in our lives in general are always confronted with difficult conversations. And I think many times we shy away from them because we don't have the confidence to really lean into these types of discussions. So I'm very excited that Dr. Snyder is here today to share with you some knowledge and skills to support you in your journey. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Dr. Snyder.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be joining everyone today from Vermont, where the leaves are changing and it's just beautiful if you can see some of it behind me. I'm really grateful for Workplace Peace Institute for scheduling this webinar at this special time. As you all know, we've entered kind of a unique season where we have all kinds of tough conversations happening and heading our way, and some of those have to do with election season, and also have to do with the holidays coming up for many people. And that can also spark some difficult conversations. And so my hope today is really to just share with you some highlights of some things I've learned over the past 20 years to help make tough conversations a little bit easier for all of us. So some things I'm going to share with you today are some competencies that I think that are important that we all have to make our conversations feel a little bit at least less difficult and help to equip us with more confidence to navigate them. And part of that includes learning about conflict dynamics, how to regulate ourselves emotionally during difficult and tough conversations, and how to have a toolbox of different engagement strategies. So each of these is, really their own course. And so I'm hoping to just sprinkle a little bit of wisdom today, some tools to get you thinking about this on a deeper level. So a lot of folks lately have said to me, I just don't have hope, with the political season and a lot of things that are going on globally in our country and in our country that are causing a lot of division. A lot of people have just stopped talking to each other because they're not finding effective strategies in really just talking about things that we disagree about. And I think that's one of the problems that we all share, and especially when these trickle down into our workplace. And so I really wanted to start by giving you a lens of hope. And that I do think that having these conversations not only are possible, but I think they're necessary. And I think, apologize, um, is one of the things that we have learned along the way is that and we as conflict professionals have learned along the way is that not all of us are equipped with the skills that are needed to be able to navigate these conversations. So if you think about specifically, I apologize, this is happening on its own. This is really strange. The slides are just advancing. As we think about, how did I learn to have tough conversations? A lot of folks haven't taken any formal education or training. It's certainly not incorporated in a lot of just thinking about like preschool or K through 12, where we really should be teaching folks really early on how to disagree, and how to collaborate with each other in a way that doesn't cause destructive conflict. And so I love this quote by Margaret Wheatley from her book, Turning to One Another. It says, I still believe that if we turn to one another, if we begin talking with each other, especially with those we call stranger or enemy, then this world can reverse its darkening direction and change for the good. As I know with all of my heart that the only way the world will change is if many more of us step forward, let go of our judgments, become curious about each other, and take the risk to begin a conversation. So by showing up here today, you're all taking the risk to start these conversations. And so I really want to applaud you for your courage. And I hope that with what you learned today, that you can dive into some of these conversations as we are seeing them more and more in our workplace. So what have I learned about competencies? What is it that we really need to know in order to get better? First of all, tough conversations are always going to be tough. Even folks who have a ton of education and degrees and training, they still struggle with these conversations because they're not easy. But what I have realized is that, as Dr. Short pointed out at the beginning, is that we can have more confidence going into these types of conversations. And so, what does it take? This is just kind of my own anecdotal uh, evidence based on what I have learned over the past 20 years, but also of some of the things I've read and researched. And what I've seen is that it's important to have an understanding of conflict dynamics. And so really, what is underneath the surface? A lot of times we argue over positions and what we think the argument is really about, but oftentimes it's about something much deeper. So we'll talk about that today. The second is emotional intelligence, that I have some form of self-awareness in how I'm showing up to a conversation, but also that not only am I self-aware, but that I can self-regulate. So I might be in a difficult conversation, be really self-aware that my blood pressure is rising, I'm getting really upset, and I'm about to say something that probably I can't take back. And so then I decide to take a walk or not say what I'm going to say or take some deep breaths. So self-regulation. And then the other components of emotional intelligence are basically other awareness and other regulation. And that's where empathy fits in. And so you've all probably heard we can't control or we're not responsible for another person's behavior. And while that's true, we also know that we can escalate a person's behavior with what we say. So for example, when we say, calm down, we know that that's not helpful. And in fact, when people say that to us, we often escalate. So we do know that there are tools that can help us escalate or de-escalate another person's behavior most of the time, not all the time. And then the third is we all have to have a really good toolbox of constructive prevention, de-escalation, and mitigation strategies. Conflict in and of itself isn't bad. In fact, it can be generative. It can be really good, but it can also be destructive. And so what we know is that the same tool might not work for the same person and for the same situation over time. And so we really want to have a wide range of tools and strategies. So My goal for today is just to give a little bit more awareness into these three areas. So let's just start into the first one. So part of conflict dynamics is just really kind of dissecting, what is it behind the conversation? What is it that makes it so tough? So I would love it if you all could, sorry, it's happening again. If you all could in the chat, please put what is it that is making conversations tough for you? Right? Uncomfortable or strong feelings, discomfort, power dynamics. Those are huge. That can be really hard to navigate. Previous conditioning, not wanting to be the bad guy, high emotions. Absolutely. Lots of things that can make a conversation difficult. Let's look at a couple more. Some of them were already mentioned. Fear of consequences is a really common one. Somebody mentioned, two people mentioned the power dynamics. Absolutely. It's very difficult to have a tough conversation with someone who is in charge of our job or our paycheck. That can be difficult. Vulnerability, right? Because when we are having a tough conversation, we might feel vulnerability, or the other person might be as well. Another one that I see that's very, very common is just that we have very different communication styles. Some of us might be more direct than others, and that might alone cause a conflict. I have experiences all the time. I work as an ombuds, and I experience all the time where we have one coworker who has more of an avoidance style. And then we have another coworker that has a more direct style. And the direct person with a direct style might look at the avoidant person and say, well, that person doesn't care or they're not invested. And actually, that's not true at all. When I go and talk to that person, they're saying, no, I just like to be able to reflect. I like to really be able to think through things and process. But then I find out that the person who has a more avoidant style of communication might feel that the person that's direct, for example, doesn't care because they're just trying to solve the problem. So a lot of times we will just kind of have mismatches in personality or style, and that can alone cause a conflict. Another one is misaligned needs, the perception that we have very different needs. Lack of confidence. I mean, one person that has, taken the training or read the book and knows exactly what to say and when to say it, and the other person is just really struggling and not knowing how to articulate themselves. History of the conflict, and that can be the history of the current conflict or the current issues that are coming up in the conversation, or it can be hundreds of years of history or oppression that can be coming into the conversation as well. Then other one is differing belief systems. A lot of folks have different beliefs, and that might be related to identity or different cultural variables around what conversations should even be had. And that can be really common as well. In different cultures or different identities might think these are issues that we don't talk about, for example, or that we're not used to talking about, and especially in the workplace. And then lastly, a lot of concerns regarding psychological safety and trust. If we don't trust each other, if we don't feel psychologically safe in a conversation, we're certainly not going to want to be vulnerable, and we're certainly not going to express our all of our underlying needs and trust that the conversation is going to be met with anything that is going to be helpful, or that we might feel like this is going to be resolved. And in those situations, a lot of folks just won't engage. Love it. Someone just put balancing accountability and support. Absolutely. All right, so a little bit more into conflict dynamics. A good friend of mine, Dr. Bernie Mayer, wrote a book called The Conflict Paradox, which is a really interesting concept. But Pruitt and Heen, in their book, talk about the conflict paradox as being a perceived divergence of interests or a belief that the current aspirations of parties cannot be achieved simultaneously. So, in other words, we have a really, really hard time believing if you and I are in a conflict. We have a hard time believing that both of us can enter this tough conversation and both of us can actually walk away from it having our needs met. So we often have the mistaken belief that it's either going to be me or it's going to be you that's going to walk away with our needs met. And what conflict professionals find, or anyone who finds themselves as a neutral third party, is that that's actually not true. Is that most of the time, when we get to those underlying needs, everyone can walk away with their needs being met. Not every time, but I would definitely say the majority of the time. So, as part of learning about conflict dynamics, it's really important to learn how to look underneath the surface and find out what people's needs actually are. And a lot of times when we're in conflict, we don't even know what our own needs are, right? We know what's bothering us, but we might not know why. So, let's go a little bit deeper. So some of you may have heard of the conflict iceberg. We look at the behavior oftentimes. So if you can all kind of think about in your mind a conflict that you've had at work that's been triggering for you, that you've just really struggled with, maybe either over time or it was a one incident. So I invite you to just kind of think about what was the behavior that you noticed from the other party? I'm going to pause just for a second so you can get that in your mind. And then what was the behavior that you saw on from yourself? If I was a fly on the wall, what would I have seen? So a lot of times the behavior, it can be withdrawal and avoidance. It can be, hands going up like this. It can be yelling. It could be eye rolling. It could be, just kind of, different nonverbal or verbal behaviors. And honestly, if you think about that top level of the iceberg, when we see that in somebody else, escalated, tone, rudeness, we're not really thinking, oh gosh, I wonder what they're thinking or feeling. Or I wonder what's really underneath the surface for that person, because we're so triggered by the behavior that we see, that we're not often looking underneath the surface. And that's totally natural. But if we really try to stop and think for a second, I invite you to use your example that I asked you to think about. What might be some of the drivers of that behavior, right? Because usually we don't act like that when all our needs are met, right? When we're happy and satisfied in our work, and we're thriving, usually we don't act that way. And so, what are some of the things that might have been driving that other person's behavior and some of your behavior? So, a lot of times it's an incongruency between values, right? Is that, if you think about the election season right now, um, or you think about a lot of the different conflicts that have happened in the workplace regarding workflow or power or hierarchy. A lot of it has to do with difference in values. It can be values related to different generations in the workplace, bring different values regarding work ethic, regarding work-life balance, regarding how long should someone take to reply or respond to an email, and should we be doing that over the weekend and after hours. We have history, we have emotions, beliefs, and norms, interests. So what's important to us? All of those things and culture and identity can be driving that behavior that we see. And so I want to challenge everyone to think about getting past that behavior. And that doesn't mean you can't set boundaries. I mean, absolutely. If that's, if someone violated your boundaries, but really trying to think about what is it that was driving that person's behavior. And if there's a way that we can get our needs met, we will see a change in behavior. Another part of conflict dynamics is really thinking about what is going on in our brain and our body during conflict, right? And a lot of times, tough conversations result in conflict, and that might be inner conflict. We might not say the conflict out loud, or it might be an outer conflict, so inter or intrapersonal conflict between two people. And so if we think about your example again that I asked you to think about is the brain and the body in conflict is not at homeostasis, or it is not in balance, right? And so our body and our brain is not evolved enough to recognize that an intense conflict is not very different um, from being chased by a tiger in the desert. Or in the jungle, not the desert. And so if you think about all the things that might happen, so alarm bells go off immediately in our brain, signaling there's some kind of emergency. And so our body is very good at preparing ourselves to either fight, flight, or freeze. And in some cases, you've also heard of the word fawn. And so one of the things immediately that goes on is we have a huge surge of hormones in our bloodstream, and that can last up to 24 hours. So even if the tough conversation is over, a lot of times when we wake up, I call it an emotional hangover because we still have hormones flooding through our bloodstream. And then we also have activation of our sympathetic nervous system. And our sympathetic nervous system has sympathy for us. It's like, we're going to help you. We're going to get you ready to run from the tiger. And so our pupils dilate and our heart rate increases. Blood flow goes to our muscles to get us ready to run or to fight or to hide. And so we have lots of things going up that are really revving us up. Our GI system changes, lots of things going on. It prepares us to see better in the dark with pupil dilation and things like that. Well, finally, our brain realizes, okay, there's not a tiger. We are not in the jungle. We are safe. It's just a really difficult conversation. So then our parasympathetic nervous system act like our paramedics to calm us down. And so they de-escalate all of those things. Our pupils get back to normal, our blood pressure, our heart rate gets back to normal, so that we can just take a breath and calm down. If there's a problem with that cycle if we are in chronic activation of our nervous system. So anytime we're in a workplace conflict or we're having tough conversations every day, we can get kind of locked in that state. And so a lot of us are just finding ourselves in the workplace in constant activation because we're having these tough conversations, constantly and all the time. And so the issue with that is that the part of our brain that we need to be successful at tough conversations, which is our prefrontal cortex that's responsible for logic and balancing emotion and logical decision making and empathy and compassion, creative problem solving, perspective taking, taking deep breaths, self-awareness and self-regulation. When we are emotionally dysregulated, we don't have access to that part of our brain very well. So that can pose all kinds of challenges when we're trying to get through a tough conversation. So it's very important that we're having these self-regulation skills. So these are some things that commonly trigger us in tough conversations. So I'm going to give you a moment to look at those. And think about whether or not in the example I asked you to recall, whether or not one of these things might have been a trigger for you and feeling dysregulated. So the one that I see the most commonly, although they vary, but the lack of respect and having identity challenged or your role challenged can be really serious activators of dysregulation. And then I also want to encourage you to think about, what is it that might have triggered that other person as well. Okay, so we also want to make sure that we are really, really good in these conversations at being self-aware. And not only being self-aware, but being able to regulate whatever is going on in our nervous system that has become dysregulated, if we have become dysregulated. So just a couple of skills and tricks to help you engage that part of your brain that is just kind of feels lost, is to really figure out for yourself, even before going into a tough conversation, what lenses you bring to a conflict. And remember, in any conflict, you're only one lens. So if you're in a conflict with another person, that person brings a lens. If you're having a tough conversation with your whole team, that's a lot of different lenses, right? And so past history with conflict, a lot of people bring workplace trauma or personal trauma to a tough conversation. A lot of people bring a history of dysfunctional work environments where conflict and tough conversations did not go well. And in fact, they were very toxic. And in some cases, I've even seen abusive and thinking about harassment and things like that. And so people might bring that into a workplace where even if that workplace is healthy and having healthy dialogue and healthy conversations, they might still come into the conversation triggered, or you might come into the conversation triggered, just knowing that it's a tough topic, or just knowing that people are disagreeing. We all bring implicit bias into a tough conversation. And that bias might be related to that other person or your team's identity. And it could be any type of identity. It could be cultural identity. It could be age. It could be power and hierarchy. Lots of different things that we bring in with respect to bias. Our worldview has a lot to do with the lens we bring to a conflict. In different culture, and that goes together with the next one. In different cultures, we might have differences in thought related to age, for example. It might not be okay to question authority, or it might not be, okay to question someone who is elder to us. And so lots of different cultural lenses that we might be bringing, or some people in their culture might not feel comfortable challenging someone else or speaking up. Temperament is another lens. Some people have, temperaments that can be a little bit more spicy than others, that are more inclined to bring up issues, where some of us might be a little bit more just withdrawn in temperament. So are we, extrovert? Are we introvert? All these things are going to impact how we show up in a tough conversation. The next one is genetics. We all have a genetic template, and temperament can be genetic. But if you think about, genetic parents, if you have aggression or things like that, that can also be a genetic trait. Introversion can also be a genetic trait. And then finally, conflict styles that I mentioned in a previous slide. So just be self-aware about what you bring to any and every difficult or tough conversation or conflict. So self-awareness, how am I showing up in the moment? And how am I paying attention to the things that are going on in my mind and in my body during a tough conversation? And so before we even self-regulate, we really need to kind of take an inventory of like, what's going on right now? Okay, I can tell my heart's racing. I can tell that my ears feel hot. I can tell that I want to lunge across the table. What are the things that you're feeling, and name that for yourself. You want to also engage your prefrontal cortex. It's kind of a trick. And I think about one of the ways I do this is one of the times I get the most emotionally dysregulated is when there's a lot of turbulence in a flight. Now, it's not a conflict, but it's the same brain process that's going on. I get very dysregulated during extreme turbulence. And so this is one of the things I try to do is I try to engage my prefrontal cortex by doing one of the things on this list, which is called serial sevens. That's counting backwards from 100 by 7. I have to be honest with you, even on a good day, I'm not great at counting backwards from 100 by 7. So I might do like by 5, but in extreme turbulence, I honestly just have to go by 1. So whatever works for you. Sequencing, so anything that you can put into sequences, making lists, and not lists about why you don't like that other person that you're having a tough conversation with, but something that's completely unrelated, a grocery list, what you have to get done at work, putting things in order. sorting things by color or size, solving problems, namely other people's problems or problems that don't have to do with your tough conversation. I already mentioned serial sevens. Music can be very regulating. I have a playlist of regulating music, and that can be either a music that's inspirational. Some people put on spiritual music or just instrumental music. Sometimes people, there's a lot of really great apps out there that have like rainforest sounds or, things like that that can be really helpful. Frontal lobe buddy. I have a buddy that I will call and say, my prefrontal cortex isn't working. I need you to be that for me. And she knows just what that means. She's going to assume that other person's perspective, right? That's not the time to commiserate with me about why that other person is being inappropriate, but it's like, help me see things through a lens that is not in fight or flight. And then mindfulness practices. Mindfulness practices are very useful to use before, during, and after a tough conversation. I like to use the metaphor, if anyone in here has asthma, for people who have asthma, we have both a rescue inhaler and one that we use every day. So the everyday one is a steroid inhaler that's preventative. And so you want to think about what mindfulness practices are you doing that can be preventative, that can keep you kind of in a baseline state. A lot of people do progressive muscle relaxation, diaphragmatic breathing, guided imagery, yoga, prayer, lots of different kinds of meditation. There's a lot of meditations on apps that are free, and then also on YouTube. And what I encourage people to do, a lot of times we try one guided meditation and we're like, I don't like meditation. Try a couple of different ones. Some are visual only, some are auditory. Some you can close your eyes and just listen. If you prefer not to look at images. So you want to be thinking about neurodiversity in these, in that we all have different preferences. And so kind of finding one that clicks for you. And so that's preventative, but also the rescue inhaler. What are you going to do in the moment when you feel escalated? And you can use those mindfulness practices in the moment to do some deep breathing, to de-escalate yourself, or to get up and walk away and be in nature. A lot of different options. Dr. Short's putting some great resources in here as well. And then mindfulness practices can be very useful also after a tough conversation to get yourself in a more grounded and regulated place. Another one to help get you regulated, if you can name it, you can tame it. And this can be really, really helpful. I actually know a lot of people who have these at their desks at work. My teenagers had this printed on their wall when they lived at the house. And we would go back and say, how are you feeling right now? A lot of times we say centered on the emotion, which are, you can see in the middle. And a lot of times we're just like, I just feel angry, right? We're really good at identifying when we feel angry, but we really need to get better at learning what is under that. Because if I know how I feel, it's easier for me to ask what I need. So for example, if I'm feeling skeptical, what I might need is more trust, or clarity even. As opposed to if I'm feeling distant or critical, right? And so if I'm feeling disappointed, for example, if you look under disgust, if I'm feeling disappointed, I'm going to probably need something different than if I'm feeling lonely, right? And so it can be really helpful to have something like a wheel to really try to figure out how am I feeling, because it works in a couple of ways. One is if you can identify it for yourself, it's called affect labeling. There's just something in our brain that clicks and is like, okay, I get it, right? But also it's helpful in regulating other, if you can say, gosh, it looks like you are really disappointed, right, you can help that other person. But not only can it help you regulate yourself, but it can also help you identify what you need. It's kind of a springboard into needs. So this is just one other way to regulate yourself, and it helps to regulate others. So, a toolbox for difficult conversations. So, just a couple of interventions and techniques. The course goes into all of these things in much more depth. So, this is just a highlight. First of all, a lot of folks just in difficult, tough conversations, and tough conversations can be you have to, give someone some really difficult feedback. For example, at work, it can be I need to tell someone that they're not honoring my boundaries. I need to tell someone that they're going to lose their job. Right? There's a lot of difficult conversations, a lot of tough conversations that we need to have that we have at work. And so a lot of times people are like, I don't know what to do, right? Another tough conversation that's really common is if someone's experiencing grief, right? Someone just lost a loved one and people are just like, I don't know what to say. I show this slide because I want to tell you if you do nothing but listen, you have done something. And so a lot of times we're like, I don't know if we helped. I don't know if we did anything. Just listening helps. So Doug Knoll, who is the author of a book called Elusive Peace, and a lot of other books. He's a mediator. I love this quote. He says, "We rarely have the experience of being deeply heard by others. Most of the time, others tune us out while we speak. When we can listen to others, especially in deep, intractable conflicts, we learn about ourselves and our capacities for positive good. When we are listened to, we feel honest respect and appreciation. Conflict cannot exist in such an environment, and harmony flourishes." I especially love that last sentence. The last two sentences really is think about a difficult conversation or tough conversation you've had with someone. If you feel honest respect and appreciation, conflict cannot exist. So, in other words, if we get our needs met in the conversation, and respect, appreciation, getting our dignity honored, those are key needs that we have as human beings. And if we can listen to each other, we can have a tough conversation and we can honor people's dignity. If we can respect them and if we can show appreciation, at least for their perspective, even if we disagree, conflict cannot exist in that environment. So just the power of listening can be enough. So what are we listening for? So if we go back to the iceberg metaphor, um, listen for underlying needs. So don't just look for behavior, listen from our heart, and listen for underlying needs. What need is being violated for that person right now? Maybe they're feeling disrespected. Maybe they're feeling that their identity is not being valued. Maybe their need for trust and psychological safety is being violated. Now you know how to approach the conversation, right? If you can really listen for needs, you can stop and address those needs right there in the moment. Listen for underlying meanings and perspectives. What did it mean to that person when I didn't reply to their email? Right? Someone is furious with me because I didn't reply to an email. Maybe what did that mean for that person, right? Maybe I have so many things on my plate and that's why I didn't reply, but it might be different for that person and they might be making different assumptions. Listen deeply for a need for support and requests for help. A lot of times people feel like they just are exploding or imploding inside. And really what they're needing is more assistance or support with their work situation or whatever's happening at work. Listen for what motivates people, dreams, visions, passions. Listen for biases that you might be hearing or fears that people might be having. Listen for barriers of understanding, emotions, feelings. Listen to what people might be thinking your intentions are or what you might be thinking other people's intentions are, because often they're wrong. Often we are interpreting intentions through our lens, and they're interpreting through theirs, and often we're both wrong. And then also there's a difference between intention and impact. Sometimes we think that if I had good intentions, even if it had a bad impact, we're absolved from the situation. And that's not necessarily true. I may have had all the best intentions in the world, but still caused harm. I need to attend to that harm and find out how we can repair that harm. Also, listen for openness to dialogue. Sometimes people just are not open to dialogue, they aren't open to conversation. And sometimes you can find that also it's not a good time for a conversation. I want to put this in context for you really quickly. This is a model that I learned about in my I took hostage negotiation training, and this is the hostage negotiation training through the FBI. And the reason I show this is because a lot of times people will tell me, okay, these skills are so wishy-washy, or they're just so fluffy, all the things that we learn. And what are some hard skills I can learn to get through tough conversations? This is what for 40 hours of training we learn. And I mean, obviously there's other things, but in hostage negotiation training, working with people who are in highly emotional or highly combative states, and it's effective to de-escalate their behavior most of the time. So basically the theory is if you want someone to change their behavior, and most of the times if we're having a tough conversation with someone, we do want them to trust to change their behavior, in that we want them to listen to us, or we want them to calm down, or we want them to see our perspective. And so if we want any type of behavior change, including collaboration, it's important that we don't just think that just by saying something logical that we're going to get a change in behavior. Because they also say in the FBI that, and I apologize, I'm forgetting who said this, but that we can't solve we can't solve emotional problems with logic alone, but we try all the time. So active listening, if we want to get behavior change, we need to use active listening skills, which you'll see on the next slide. We need to demonstrate empathy, which is perspective taking. I hear you and I understand your perspective. That doesn't mean I agree with your perspective, but I can understand why you might be feeling how you are feeling. So we need to show empathy in our behavior and with our words. And it's not until we listen actively, we show empathy, till we can really get rapport with people, and we can then have influence over their behavior to change their behavior. So I encourage you to think about conversations that you're having, and tough conversations, and what is it that you're trying to get that person to change with respect to their behavior, and how have you spent time with them showing that you actually care about their perspectives as well. So in terms of active listening, these are skills, that people often call soft skills, but I think they're hard skills because they help and they show people empathy, they show compassion, and they show that we care at least to understand their perspective. And so this is using words that are active, encouraging. Are we encouraging people to keep the conversation going? So that's even just saying things that we call minimal encouragers, like just saying, or tell me a little bit more. Clarifying what they said. You can say, I think that what you're trying to say is this. Acknowledging, it sounds like you have been through a lot of stress with this situation. Showing some empathy, empathizing, that must be really hard for you. Help reframe what people are saying. So if they're coming at you with something that feels toxic, you can try to think about what the need is and reframe it. So you can say something like, sounds like you're feeling really disrespected right now. There's a really great video on reframing and framing by Bernie Mayer on YouTube. Dr. Short, if you don't mind putting that, if you find it, in the chat. Um, Summarizing can also be really helpful, and it just makes people feel like they are heard. Validating people and just validating people's experience and what they heard can also be really helpful. There are several models out there for toxic conversations, tough conversations that can be really helpful as well. This is one that we recommend. It's called Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. There's another one. There's a difficult conversations book that we also talk about in the course that is also really helpful. Thank you, Dr. Short. And basically, this is a very simple model, and I will just illustrate it really quick, kind of going off of my example about emails. This is actually a very common issue that I hear, is that people will say they never respond to my emails, or they don't respond to my emails in time at work. So I'm going to walk you through this framework. So the first step in the framework is it's critical to approach someone without judgment. So if you think about, if someone just barrels at you and says, "You're so irresponsible, you don't respond to my email," you are not going to open your head and your heart for that person in that moment and think, "What's underneath the iceberg?" Right? You're going to get into fight or flight. You're going to defend yourself. So instead, you can say, "I observe that when my emails are not responded to, it makes me feel like I'm not important. And it makes me feel so." And then the second one is how you feel in the response. And then the third one is to identify and name the need that's under the feeling. And so then I can say, when you don't respond to my email, it makes me feel like I'm not important. It's really important to me that we have strong collegial relationships at work. And so I want to make a request that if you're not able to respond to my emails in a timely manner, that you just shoot me a note and let me know that you're busy, right? And so you're always ending with a request, because a lot of times we just go and we give a person a problem and we walk away, but they don't really know what to do differently. And so this is a way to help people to sit safely. It's a way for you to safely convey what your needs are, what you value, and then to make a specific request. And people are pretty amenable to this model. If you think about it, when you walk away from a conversation that was a really tough conversation, what is it that you walk away and be like, "That went well," right? Or "That was a meaningful conversation." We want to turn tough conversations into meaningful conversations where people feel seen, heard, and included. Those are all basic human needs that we have. We want to make sure people's dignity is honored. So whatever model that you use, these are really important. We want to know that parties understand each other on a deeper level. That doesn't mean that people are going to agree with you, but it means that people feel understood. Again, basic human needs are met. It deepens connections, trust is built, clarity is gained, and purpose is defined for people. And so this is just another lens as you prepare for tough conversations, which we always encourage people, prepare for conversations. This is just one more lens. And I want to leave you with this quote before I hand it back over to Dr. Short, by Maya Angelou. "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." So yes, these tools, these skills are very valuable. And words matter. Words matter a lot in the conversations that we have. But those words can impact how we make people feel. And how we make people feel can help meet basic human needs for people. And as a result, we see unity, we see de-escalation, and we see progress in our conversations. So I want to turn it over to Dr. Short, and then we will take your questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Snyder, for that wonderful learning session. I actually got so much out of it. For those of you who would really like to dig deeper into building skills around navigating tough conversations, I really want to encourage you to check out Dr. Snyder's online course on our website. This is a 6-hour self-paced course. And I think that you will, if you got something out of this, you're going to really get a lot out of this course. If you'll go to the next slide. So additional courses that I think can support you in deepening your own skills and competencies and becoming a conflict competent leader. All of these courses are available on our website. We have courses around leadership intelligence, specifically social and emotional intelligence and dignity intelligence. A wonderful course on mindful leadership, taught by Dr. O.T. Hilgert, which I highly recommend. You may want to catch her webinar, The Mindful Leader or Mindfulness in the Workplace. I shared the link in the chat. Trauma-informed leadership. We have several courses on conflict engagement and several courses to support you in your own diversity, equity, and inclusion learning journey. So I'm going to end the recording here and then open up for the next 5 or 6 minutes. If anybody has any questions, we would certainly love to have a conversation with you.